You all ready to join me today in our trip to outer space?
Yeah.
Albert Shivers.
The Matrix doesn't happen.
That's very true.
Come along quietly or not.
Night.
Goodbye, Will.
As I about the time to bright.
From Albert
The
Shivers.
mysteries of the fading light.
They don't have to like it.
They're trying to put a caravan.
The general concept is that creativity flourishes in an atmosphere of freedom.
Hello, folks, and welcome to another episode of the Planet Shivers Podcast. I am, and always will be, Albert Shivers, and on this episode, I am joined by Caren Jo Shapiro a little bit later on. Her and I have a long conversation about her artwork, her life, and how the two have intersected over the years. In other news, the podcast has some interesting stuff coming up. I'm going to start doing field podcasts. In other words, taking the podcast out into the world and doing some recording that way. The first stop is going to be a couple of racetracks. This coming weekend, I'm going to Grandview Speedway to record a little bit of their championship weekend. And then the following weekend, I'm going to try to make it down to Maple Grove Speedway, which is the closest drag strip to me at the moment, to record their NHRA event down there. I went in 2019, and it was so much fun. The NHRA fan experience is really second to none, better than any other motorsport, in my opinion. You get to go in the pits, you get to get close to the cars, you get to interact with a lot of people, a lot of the drivers, a lot of the crew people. There's tons of displays. And last time I was there, they had a huge Mopar display, and you could check out old Plymouth Superbirds and Dodge Daytonas and Chargers. It was really, really a lot of fun. With art stuff, I got a big new piece coming up, big project that I'm excited about. I'm going to do some dribs and drabs and little sections of it, photo-wise, to show you what I'm up to on Instagram and the website. And as you probably know already, the Instagram is @AlbertShivers and the website is www.albertshivers.com. And a little bit of meaningless, stupid news, but it could be exciting for me. The last white whale. For a long time, I collected records. I'll give you a little backstory here. And the last several years, I've gotten the records that I've wanted, and I've lost the hunger to really collect. I've actually been getting rid of things to make my record collection smaller and more concise, because records take up a lot of room, and I'm just trying to not take up so much room. But the last white whale on my list is Hank Williams III's Ghost to a Ghost record, which is up on eBay right now. And knowing how eBay works, I might be able to nab this for not a lot of money. Normally, it's on eBay for over $100, and I'm not spending that on a record. So I've been patient, waiting in the bushes, sorta, for this to come back. This might be the chance. By the time this podcast comes out, the auction on it will probably have been over. But just for the sake of a fun story, I'll try to remember to fill you in on what happened and if I ended up getting it. And I might share what I paid for it. Right now, the bidding is at $30. We'll see if it stays there. But I have my limits. So we'll see. I'm a big fan of Hank 3. Probably the only current artist I'd be interested in going to see. I was just having a conversation with my friend Mike about it, and it basically boiled down to Hank 3. Maybe PJ Harvey I'd go see, but I'd definitely like to see Hank 3 before he stops doing shows. I'd like to experience that. But that's enough for me. Let's get to my conversation with artist Caren Jo Shapiro after these messages.
What makes people all over America break down and cry like this?
Call 1-900-9099-CRY and hear it for yourself. $2 for the first minute, 45 cents each additional minute. If you're under 18, ask your parents before you call. 1-900-9099-CRY.
When did we get so soft? You know what this country used to sit on? Logs, girders, poles. Being comfortable? That's not what America's all about. Couch down. Sit down or get out of the way.
Caren Jo Shapiro, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let's talk about a little bit of what you're working on now.
Well, right now I am working on a painting that's either 3x6 or 4x6, I'm not sure, and it is called The Penis Roller Coaster.
Mm-hmm.
It is part of my series about sexual abuse and violence against women and children, and it depicts this picture of a roller coaster with their cars or penises, and women are taking this ride against their will, and so whatever emotion is depicted in that, which ranges from despair to people falling off, which relates to the psychological damage that is incurred when women and children are raped or violated. So that's what it's about.
Okay. And what mediums are you working in?
I generally work in oil.
Okay.
Oil on canvas or oil on paper.
Okay. And how far into this piece are you?
Well, this piece I have been working on for quite a long time because it's been a struggle. Sometimes the work goes really quickly, and those are the most fun, and also the least amount of struggle.
Okay.
I've never quite been satisfied with this, so periodically I revisit, and I'm hoping this time I make it to the finish line.
Okay. So a lot of your paintings are political, and a lot of them are very striking with their imagery. Sometimes does painting things so heavy cause you to have to take a break in between, or does that get to you, for lack of a better term, at all?
Well, it's funny you should ask that.
Okay.
Because I'm really going through a period right now where I feel really deeply impacted by my work. Sometimes it depends, but right now I'm just between what's going on in the world and the subject material of my own work. I am definitely not having the easiest, most fun time in my studio.
Okay. Are there things you do to loosen that up, or is it just something you go through and then it passes?
Well, I was taking Lexapro for quite a while, so that was an attempt to help with, just turn down the volume of the emotion a little bit for me.
Mm-hmm.
I've now gone off of it, I think, which has just amped up the amount of pain that I feel when I'm painting, and the amount of empathy I feel for the state of the world and the people that I depict in my paintings. Also, I am a psychotherapist, so I deal with subjects like this all the time. So, so I don't know. Right now, I'm in a very emotional state, and that's not necessarily bad. I think that it's a normal reaction. It is a normal reaction to what's happening in the planet.
Mm-hmm. And giving a creative outlet.
That's always
been the best thing you can do with it.
That's absolutely the best thing. I mean, I think that transforming something that's horrific into art is probably one of the best, aside from changing those things that are horrific. I think it's probably one of the best. It's the best medicine, and it's also the best things we can do.
Gotcha. How much does your work and your art overlap?
Well, clearly the subject of the people that I work with, their lives and what they grapple with and the injustice that they deal with is often the subject of my work.
Mm-hmm.
But I made a clear decision when I was going to school to keep both subjects. I went to grad school for art and then also for psychotherapy, and I really never wanted to combine the two and go into something like art therapy. I wanted very distinct bodies of interests and work for myself. Partially because when I paint, I don't want to paint for anybody other than myself. And so I just want to keep it really separate. And yeah.
Are there any paintings that you don't show?
Only the ones that people will not show.
Okay.
I am willing to show them all. Maybe except for the earliest works that I did, and I'm not too proud of any longer.
Right.
But
I could relate on that.
But I paint so that my work gets out into the world. Perhaps earlier on I was a little more idealistic about using my work to help change the world. Mm-hmm. I feel a little less optimistically about that, but it is still to move the needle in some way, in a direction that I think the world should go. So I definitely would like my work to get out into the world, and I was part of a couple of poster. What do I want to say? Poster. There was an art show that was that utilized posters and put up political posters, both in D.C., in New York, and I forget the other city, but. I would love to get more of my work out in that way, and not necessarily gallery exhibitions, although I can't say that a lot of galleries are pounding down my door to show what I'm doing, but, mass produce and get it out there on the streets, because I think that people need to see their experience reflected, and I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm. And a gallery is only a certain amount of people. Right. But to have it out.
And a certain amount of people, very often a particular part of the population that can, only that either can afford to see exhibitions or, plus there's a whole game one needs to play to get shown, and you need to be able to make a lot of money to be showing, because the gallery space needs to make money.
Yeah.
So it becomes a commercial product. And I don't really have that problem, so I don't have to make those hard decisions. Uh-huh. But yeah. And then before the midterm this year, I made posters out of my works when really in direct response to Roe versus Wade being overturned. I used a lot of my paintings and created some new works, and went and plastered all over New York City, and actually here also in Stroudsburg, and got some varied responses. Up here in the city, I got some good responses. Up here, my response was mixed, and unfortunately, shortly thereafter, my Instagram was taken down. So I am starting again kind of from scratch with that, but that I think somebody was not happy with what I was doing up here and reported me. But I just feel like it's very important, especially in terms of Roe versus Wade and what's happening with abortion rights and just the prevalence of rape and violence against women and children, women and girls that lead to pregnancy, and then how dare, the courts decide that these young people, or older people that have been raped or violated in some way cannot access abortions. I think something is very wrong with with how that's designed.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like visual art moves the needle? I don't think it did as much as it used to in the past, but do you feel like it moves the needle these days?
I don't know that anything moves the needle that much these days. I think when we are up against, massive misinformation and disinformation and lies, I think that, and people are bombarded with that, I think it would be very hard to actually move the needle in another direction. So no, I don't think that visual arts has that great an impact, although I think everything has some impact. And I do believe, I just came to mind, I saw this stick figure, I guess it was a stick figure meme or a little booklet about rape, and it had all these things, these pictures of don't do this if your girlfriend's passed out, don't do this if and it was put into the different terms. It was very like tea, don't give her tea, like hot tea if she's this, if she's that. Anyway, I think that these little things can help, and I think everybody has to I would like everybody to help, because I think if there's going to be moving the needle, then I think it's going to require a lot.
So maybe art could at least plant a seed. Do you think that at least, or maybe at least get somebody thinking in a different direction? Absolutely.
I think it, especially, the kind of art I do is very confrontational. And I do think part of it is planting a seed. The other part is empowering people that are victimized by the rulings of or by the abuse that's happening in our society. I just know also, like, it comes to mind, one of my paintings, it's called Don't Say Gay. Okay. So that came about after DeSantis started with his censorship in the schools and threatening teachers and forbidding anybody to discuss being gay, and then getting rid of the books in the libraries. Anyway, I think that the more we show outrage at these things that are happening, the more it empowers other people to be outraged. And I think people need to be really outraged right now.
Gotcha. So, to we'll shift the subject a little bit, how did you get started in art? Did you go to school?
Well, I started before I went to school. Okay. I think
the good ones do.
I think I started because it was something I could be good at and could find an expression for being basically a relatively unhappy child. Okay. So I think it was a really good outlet for me. I think it was also, I needed a way to excel because my sister was good at everything. Okay. So I found painting or drawing. I was like, okay, I got something. So I think a little bit I went into it for that, but it was just always something that I enjoyed.
Did you start with drawing, or did you go right to painting? What attracted you first in the arts?
Probably it was too soon for me to remember to answer that question, but I remember early watercolors and early magic markers. Okay. I have a kindergarten picture that I magic markered, and first of all, I can't say it was anything particularly talented. I certainly didn't show signs of genius, but yeah. So I think I started, I guess, in ways that kids often start.
Right. Okay. And then when did you feel like social justice and politics? When did that enter your work? Did it enter your work early, or was it something that evolved with the times?
Well, I think that I always painted based on what I was feeling. And so my work has changed through time as I have changed through time and with age. So I think that first, I experienced a lot of depression and just angst. So I would paint about that, and then I would paint about, I came out in high school, so I began to paint about LGBTQ things, and I was then painting about unconventional attractiveness, partially as an offshoot of my own being attracted to unconventionally attractive women at the time, say butch women that were not what society would deem pretty or attractive. So I painted a lot about that, and then In fact, when I went to grad school, my graduate exhibition was a series of all my exes, and each one had a little blurb or a little caption. And so very much about my life in answer to your question. Right. So that later on, as that became, or as I became not quite as, I don't know, extremely sexual and going through, you know, I guess whatever, my 20s and 30s where I lived and breathed sex, and things calmed down a little, and I think I shifted in terms of really turning to, you know, to more social justice movements, although it's always been indirectly or directly social justice related.
Right, sounds like it. And we could go into whatever you want and not go into whatever you want.
I've already gone into a lot more than I thought I was going to say.
What was your experience like coming out when you did? Because I'm sure it's not like today.
No,
it's hard today, but
it was definitely odd and weird. Mostly because I had fallen in love with a woman when I was 17, and she was 29 and lived in Florida, and I had to leave to go back to high school in New York, so I had to leave her, and I was devastated, and it was like my first real love. And when I came back to school, luckily I went to an alternative high school, because I would never have gotten away with this in a regular high school. But
which high school did you go to?
It was called the Village School. It was on Long Island.
Oh, okay. I have family there too.
Do you?
Yeah.
So luckily for the Village School, or I would have been a high school dropout altogether. But I came back, I missed the first month of school. I came back in October and was writing love poems. All I could write was terrible love poems, you know, like corny, terrible love poems. And I did, you know, started painting pictures of this woman. And in the poetry magazine, I had submitted my piece. And then my advisor, even though it was an alternative school and supposed to be very cool and liberal, pulled me aside and said, listen, we can't publish a piece unless, the only way the school could publish a piece is if we don't take money from the Board of Education. And that means it's going to be basically a copy that's stapled together rather than bound and done professionally. So he said, what we'll do, if you're okay with this, is that the school could vote on it. So vote to whether censor my piece out of the magazine or to include my piece in the magazine. So the school voted, and to the credit of my peers, voted my piece in, and we ended up with this rather flimsy, not anything fancy magazine. But that's how I came out to the community, pretty much.
So the poem was you coming out. Was that the only thing that kept the powers that be, let's say, from being iffy about whether they wanted it in the magazine or not?
Yes, because it was about a woman, by a woman, or by, a young woman. Right. And it was not okay to be outwardly gay. So they would either, I guess they assumed or knew that the board would not grant them the budget for this publication if my piece was in it. I know it sounds like unbelievably background, but backwards. But here we go again. And here we go again, which is why I am so disturbed about what's happening in our country and the targeting of transgender people, and, you know, DeSantis's Don't Say Gay and the banning of books. It just is an unbelievable situation to be here all these years later and to see this now going on, you know, at least as bad, or actually worse than it was back then. So it's pretty disheartening.
Yeah, I could imagine seeing it early on.
I mean, I saw the Don't Say Gay when fighting for gay rights in the military, or the right to be gay and still be in the military, because the original thing was you get thrown out. The next thing was, well, don't ask, don't tell. So you have to keep it a secret. Right. And, you know, and here we are again. And then we finally got, you know, acceptance in the military, at least in theory. And now here, you know, now it's gone backwards, and we're seeing this not even in the military. We're seeing this just in our schools. where you have populations of young LGBTQ kids that now have no mirrors or nobody to even talk about it with. So very often coming from homes that are unaccepting, which is also part of the reason that the suicide rate is so high for the youth and the LGBTQ plus population.
So do you feel that homes have also gotten less accepting? Or families?
Well, I think that we are still more accepting than it was, especially when I was young. But I think that anytime hate or discrimination is permitted or mainstreamed, then it will start influencing how parents and everyone else accepts their kids. So if it is now acceptable and deemed unacceptable to be gay, then of course a large part of the population will go along with that, because one, they don't know any better, and two, nobody wants to have a child that doesn't fit in or that is seen as sick or deviant. So it definitely then harkens back to, or takes me back to, my parents of course didn't want me to be gay, or didn't want me to like women. That was certainly not an easy sell. But I suspect that it's already hard for these kids, so it's just going to be harder.
Gotcha. So to bring it back into art a little bit, how much? So you mentioned before that you're mainly doing it for yourself, and I could relate to that with my art, and I think that you have to do that, otherwise the art probably isn't going to be honest and isn't going to be as good.
Right.
How much do you, being that your work is so much concerning social justice and politics, how much do you think about the viewer in terms of they're looking at your piece as a shared experience or being able to relate to it?
Well, everything I'm painting is something that people can relate to if they allow themselves to go there emotionally. I think the biggest problem I have with my work is that some people don't think it should be, that art should be upsetting. Like people are, well, I don't want to, and I understand if you don't want to buy it and put it over your couch. I mean, honestly, I don't want it over my couch either, a lot of my paintings. But I do not understand that, art should not provoke strong emotion. And I mean, there are very few people, unfortunately the statistics are now, I think it's 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 women are raped or sexually assaulted. So I guess my feeling is, if we cannot look at it, then we will not change it. If we do not have a dialogue that's out there and people are not enraged, then how does it change? And really what I want my art to do, or what I want from this world, is for change to happen and for people to start really interrogating what's going on. And what comes to mind when I say that is that the stuff that, the way that men talk about women, the way that, I think that every man who doesn't believe in rape or violence against women and children should have conversations with their fellow men. They make this as an issue about, women and children, but the problem is the socialization of men, and I think we really need to grapple with that. So I'm hoping that somehow in the midst of every other emotion that you get from looking at my work, that that's what it's about.
You include a lot of text in your work. Now, you mentioned that you wrote poetry earlier on. Do you still write poetry? Or
I really don't write. I really don't write much. I did attempt a big project. I never made it to the finish. To finish it, at least not yet. And
not yet.
Not yet. But no, I really don't. I don't write much anymore, except on my canvases. I tend to write a lot now.
Okay. So what inspires you to write on the canvas and not write off the canvas? Is it the artwork?
Well, what I want to. At first, I think it works with the image. I think my paintings about Trump are, and the text that follows, I think, otherwise they would look like lovely portraits of the man, which is not exactly what I'm going for. So I think it's necessary. I also think it adds something poignant and something that I don't think, if I thought the art could say it enough, then I wouldn't use the words. So I feel like in conjunction it's stronger. I mean, I wouldn't just use the words either, because I think we see words all the time and I don't think that they register, but I'm hoping that, the joining of the two at least gets my message more effectively across.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is it, so on if you're doing a painting of Trump, let's say, it's easy to say you're not a fan, and that's, so is it hard?
That would be an understatement, but go ahead.
Is it tough? Like, this is a question I've always had about it. So I've never done political art. If I do, it's just my little pinky toe that I dip in. Is it tough to do portraits of somebody or topics that you don't like?
Well, mostly I see it as vehicle. So even when I am doing a picture of a young child suffering, it's not that I like to draw that. So that is just a normal thing for me. There are steps, and doing this beautiful painting of Trump is the first step, knowing, and I guess what gets me through is I have the whole vision in my head about what I'm using it for.
Right.
So could I paint a commission of Trump? Probably not. But could I paint a commission of Trump with a message on it? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And then put it up in the street? Yes.
Yeah, I had a funny conversation with another artist friend of mine about who they think, or who we might think they're going to get to do the presidential portrait. So every president has his presidential portrait. And it's just a funny thought to think, like, what artist is
I would like to do
job?
that, because I have this painting called Pussy Grabber, and I would like the job. I would donate that one for free.
Yeah, and I don't know if I still haven't been able to find out who.
Unfortunately, I don't think there's a shortage of people. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made it into the White House, and he wouldn't be polling where he is now. So I'm sure, even though I do think that many artists tend to be a little bit more woke or a little bit more aware, I think you can certainly find a handful that are going to be happy to do that portrait and make it into the White House.
I'm not inconsiderate. I know my cigarette or cigar smoke irritates my family, and it smells bad, too. That's why I went out and bought Ronco's portable smokeless ashtray. It filters out irritating smoke, allowing my family to breathe cleaner, fresher smelling air. Velcro fastener secures the portable smokeless ashtray to prevent it from moving.
This Christmas, show you really care. Get smokeless ashtrays by Ronco. They make fabulous Christmas gifts.
Did you ever think about doing murals?
Well, I have done mural-like work, but not really outside.
Okay.
So in answer to your question, no. And I don't know that I would know how to do a mural. I think it might be, I don't work like blowing things up and by, painting the image from a blown up image. So I work freehand. In fact, sometimes I don't even draw first. I just will go into, so I don't know how I would do with that, but it would be I would be open to it.
Yeah. Not penciling first is a very fun way. I always think of it as, you're on a high wire without the net underneath you.
Right, except the stakes are not quite that high.
No, but depending on how much you care about the art, it could be.
True. I have learned not to get too attached to the art. So, in fact, when I started out, and for a good portion of my life, I was pretty broke. And I had a painting partner. We used to share the cost of the model. Okay. And we both we laughed, and at the end of our lives, we are going to have one painting each, and it's going to be yards thick, because all we do is, paint over what we did last week and paint on it again, So that is the good thing about oil paint, at least, that you can do that.
So you a painting partner, did you two work on pieces together?
No, we just shared an expense because back, I love working from life. That is my favorite way to work. And we couldn't really afford the cost of a model, so we'd just set up in my living room, and we would both paint from the person standing there. Okay. So, yeah.
So did you show back then at all?
I mean, I've always shown I've never really worked at showing, so that is, probably not. Marketing is not my strong suit. So
Me neither.
I am not great. Usually the shows that I get are people asking me. I have in the last couple of years, so I have been showing a lot more in the last couple of years, mostly because I've had somebody handling it for me, like applying for shows. Because if I have to apply for a show, it's never going to happen. I am not super techie. I also, I'm between psychotherapy and actual painting. I do not have time, and I don't want to spend the time. It all depends on where you are, because I used to do portraits a lot. I mean, even people portraits. I don't love doing people portraits because everybody wants to look younger or thinner or, and I'm just like, that is the opposite of what I want to do. But it did get me to Europe, and it did keep me there for a while. So I was, it wasn't too bad at the time. Now I would, unless it was something really special or I really wanted to paint somebody, which sometimes I do, I would not do that.
Right. So you were doing commissions, and did it bring you to Europe?
Well, I was working as a waitress for like 20 years after I got my master's in fine arts, because I could not make a living, of course. And I had decided I wanted to go to Europe. So I was working 2 jobs, a lunch job and a dinner job, and then saving my money. And then I sold everything I had in New York, and all my waitress change cashed in. And it got me there, but I met people there. In fact, I met people on my way from England to Holland on the boat, and got some commission work out of that. In fact, this guy paid me $2,000 for a commissioned portrait, which was phenomenal for me at the time. And and then introduced me to some friends when I was in Amsterdam, and I stayed there for almost a year. It was really it was the first time I didn't have to, as an artist, I didn't have to have a waitress job. So that was very special and a wonderful time where I could just paint and not make a living in the conventional way.
Right. So. How did it change your work at all? Did the change in lifestyle, that is?
What do you mean? Change in lifestyle? Did the change in lifestyle change my work?
Right, yeah.
The best thing was that I could get up in the morning and have one thing to do. I was elated. I could get up, have my coffee and paint. I just never had the luxury of doing that. I was always, eking out a living, trying to pay rent, and killing myself, trying to really get the rent paid. Yeah. Especially living in New York was not so easy. So.
No, it didn't get any easier.
I know. But if I tell you what my first apartments went for, you would not believe the price compared to what they're going for now. Right. Anything in the arts. Well, that was the amazing thing when I went to Amsterdam, is that I met all these artists, and they were taking over. They were squatting in this school, this abandoned school, and this is what I loved about Amsterdam, is that people actually could fight for what they wanted. And first of all, it's a society that supports the arts, unlike here. And they won. They got to stay in that. They had their ateliers in this building, and they got to stay there. It was a totally. I mean, Amsterdam was amazing and fantastic in so many ways, but in the way that everybody had said to me, because I was not too happy with America even back then, you think there's someplace better, go find it. And I went, and I was like, oh shit, this is better. Right. This is so much better. I can't even believe this. It was really, really special time.
And was it more accepting?
Of being gay? Yes, of everything. They were just, they had no problems with gay people in the military long before us. And not to say, look, it's not utopia or anything, but it was amazing. And plus they had rent subsidies. Everybody had a place to live, and everybody basically had enough food. I don't know, I haven't been back there. It was a long time ago, so I can't say what's going on now, but it was, and the people were not homeless and on the streets. I remember visiting halfway through. I came back to New York City, and I was in Penn Station, and I just started crying. I was like, I cannot believe this guy came up to me. I was sitting at one of these cafes in Penn Station where I was just sitting outside with a cup of coffee, And this guy came and he said, "Can I have your empty cup when you're done? Because they won't let me sit down if I don't look like I bought something." And I just like, it was heartbreaking. So Holland was a wonderful relief and a really nice, very, actually I showed in Holland. I mean, it was really quite something. Yeah.
That's cool. Were you anywhere else in Europe?
Well, I started in England. Actually, I met my painting partner there. He was going there, and so I went and we shared a room in England, and I was there for about 6 weeks in London, and then I was going to go broke because the dollar was like half of the pound back then, and I was like, I have to get out of here. Besides, I really didn't love London. It just reminded me too much of New York, and people were just like, I got on the tube on their subway, and it was just the same faces, like everybody's exhausted and depleted, and not what I was looking for. So I went from there. I spent 6 weeks there, and then I went from there. I took this overnight boat to the Hook of Holland, and was working in an international work camp there for a place called Arnhem. First, I was in this city called Arnhem, and we were redoing a youth center. And then on the weekends, I went to Amsterdam and I made some connections. I met this woman. Came back and picked me up a week later. And until I could find a place to stay, I stayed with her. And I met all of her creative friends. She was a writer, so I met all her writer friends. And it was a very magical time. Oh, and then, I'm sorry, then I went to Spain. And didn't stay to paint, just really traveled just to see Spain. And so I went from Madrid, Barcelona, and down the south of Spain. And the only time I've been back was when I met my friend from Holland again years later, and we went to the south of France, just drove, and that was pretty wonderful. But yeah, I came back when my niece was born, and that was the end of my travels for a while.
Okay, gotcha. How much did those travels affect your work?
I'm not sure. I just know I was prolific, and I was, again, like really reconnected with my work. I mean, of course, seeing other cultures and seeing other people, and actually seeing a society where people could make a difference within the content that valued art in general and culture was just an amazing thing to witness. Yeah. I think, if anything, it really solidified my feelings about capitalism and America, and made me see it, and made me more firm in my vision about what I felt was wrong with this country. You know, I mean, Holland is a social democracy, which is something that I would absolutely support. So it really, it also made me feel like everybody, you people that are anti-socialized medicine and anti, all this, like, the American way, I'm like, you're all crazy. You're voting down your own rights or your own, ability to live like a human being. It was really, anyway, it was very educational. And of course, everything I learned translates somehow or goes into my art in some way.
Right. So, and it sounds like it inspired you to dig into deeper with the topics of your art, and politically, social justicely, and things like that.
Right. It was a definite indirect, an indirect link, for sure.
Was it a bummer coming back?
It was very hard to come back.
Okay.
It was, I remember crying on the subway, because I was already a hardened New Yorker at the time, so I didn't walk around and cry.
Right.
But sitting on the subway after that, and then this guy asked me for my cup, I just was breaking down all over the place. It was very hard until, of course, you get immune, you get toughened, and you stop seeing the suffering of people. And, but it was very difficult to come back. I actually thought about living there, staying there, and if it, a couple of things kept me from doing that. One is that I don't think Holland was like rolling out the carpet for people that were, they were like, the immigration policy was not like, oh yeah, come on over, you could just stay here. So that was not happening. But also, I have family here, and that made it harder.
Right, that's understandable.
Can I just add to that answer, because it was really interesting that. The other thing is, because Holland and Amsterdam was so great in a lot of ways, I really felt like I would have a hard time. It would be hard for people to ever understand where I came from. So at the end of the night, like a bunch of women, we would go to the lesbian bar and jump on our bikes.
Okay.
Because everything was bicycles. And even if it was freezing out. Anyway, so we would bicycle, and they would drive their bikes into the back of the apartment buildings where they had these little sheds for their bikes. And all I know is like my radar was going off a mile a minute. I was like, no, you don't do this. You don't drive to the back of an apartment building in the middle of the night. Like, there's a woman alone. Are you crazy? This is a formula. This is a setup, to get raped, to get mugged, to get whatever. And what it made me realize, especially since I started my life in Queens, and I grew up basically fighting and, just to not get beaten up. I mean, it wasn't such an easy, it wasn't terrible, but it certainly wasn't, wasn't super easy. I felt like nobody would really understand. Or even getting an eviction notice on my door, which happened after I was working, trying to waitress 2 different jobs and still coming home and finding an eviction notice because I couldn't pay my rent.
In New York?
In New York.
Okay.
So I really felt like, how am I going to find people that I can relate to on a deep level in that way that would understand where I came from? I don't know that would have stopped me entirely, but I think that there was something about, and I don't want to couch this as privilege, because I don't think it's real privilege to be able to be safe or privilege to not have to lose your apartment because you can't make enough money. But it really felt like I would have a hard time finding sources of identification from my past or even understanding my fears. Again, I want to add to that. This was a long time ago. I think that I was in Holland over 20 years ago. So I don't know what it's like. I haven't revisited. So I want to add that.
Right. So just to clarify what you're saying for me a little bit, in the people, your friends in Holland, weren't completely able to relate to where you were coming from in terms of just putting the bike in the back, going down the dark alley.
Right.
To them, this wasn't a big deal. There was no problem with that.
No, they did it all the time. This was just the thing. Everybody at the end, the bar closed, I think it was 2 o'clock in the morning, but everybody would get on their bikes and ride home and drive into dark places. And it was like, it was totally normal. And for me, it would be like, I would never, I'm always vigilant and always, aware of my surroundings. And, as a woman alone, I would never drive my bike into a dark anything.
Did you hold on to that in your time there, or did it ease up at all?
I definitely eased up, because I really understood that we were safe. It didn't mean that there wasn't a reminder, like, oops, what are we doing here? But it definitely, I trusted that everybody knew what was safe and what was normal, and so it was it was nice to let that go.
No, I'm sure.
It is actually a thing that makes me very angry about being in this country as a woman, particularly, is that my freedoms are curtailed because of the dangers imposed by men, and I only made worse now with the now that everybody has a gun. And like even hiking, a simple thing that I would love to do alone, and I feel unsafe to do so. So it's very infuriating that a lot of the things that I would just, be able to do, I actually can't. So I appreciated it there, and I'm really angry about that, the victimization of women is just so high in this country that, that women can't be free. And I know that men can't be fully free either, but just, multiply that, And then, of course, I know it's not just women, and people of color have it even worse. I'm just like, they don't have, first of all, not everybody has a weapon in Holland, so it's safer in that level. But anyway, it's all connected, so it was nice not to feel afraid.
Yeah. So, through your experience, what do you think that needs to happen beyond involvement in art and us artists all putting our 2 cents in? Like, through your eyes, what do you think could happen to improve things?
Well, I think That's a how long is this podcast? One is we have to put some checks and balances back for capitalism and put some controls on those corporations that the government is now, there's this revolving cycle of people that are, in working for the corporation and then suddenly in government and then out of government working for the corporation. And as long as we have elections that are based on money, then there's going to be pandering to every corporation. And so the world, as we see it, is getting more and more, our food is poisoned because it costs money to keep people safe. And the corporation's bottom line is making a buck. So we are, I would need we would need some time, but I would start with, the way things, I would start with so many things I can't even begin. But let's just start with, what we can't start with is banning books in schools that talk about the history of black people in our country. Like if we don't know our history, then first of all, we're raising a society of idiots, and idiots can't make the world better. So unless we really are raising a society of educated, empathetic humans, nothing is going to get better. So that in conjunction with changing the power of the corporation, I think is a good start.
To drift back to art and in the topic of
good.
escaping.
Good.
Do you ever use your art to escape?
I think there is an escape in the transformation of pain to creation. Like I have to say, of course, sometimes I really love what I make.
Right.
I think it's really beautiful, or I think it's really good or touching. And so in that way, it's an escape. It gives me a good feeling. So that way, it's really a good, the process may be painful, but hopefully the outcome leads me to a place that I feel good about and I feel some happiness and joy with.
Okay. I seen you had put up a painting recently that was just a little girl. What made you do that one?
Okay, it was a picture of this little black girl on her birthday, and she was beaming. She I think she's only 4 or 5 years old, and she's just like smiling for me, and she's gorgeous. She's just like that beauty that comes from unbridled joy of children. And I titled it Before, and it's the loss of that breaks my heart. It's what happens to 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 girls in our country. And the statistics are not, are similar all over the world, but I'm just dealing with right here.
Right.
And it's the loss of that absolute unshadowed joy that just breaks my heart. So as I'm painting that, even though she's exuberant and happy, I feel like the foreboding and the sadness that accompanies that. And so that's a picture. I posted it because people, of course, love when I paint just something that looks unpolitical. I had to add the title because I don't do anything without a consciousness of, a deeper consciousness about it. So while I'm in the joy of that, of her glee, I'm also in the fear for her and the sadness of all those other gleeful children that have been so harmed.
Does the idea or the plan of a deeper consciousness in the painting, is that the first thing that you start with when you first have an idea, let's say for a new painting? Is
Very
that what
often.
you start with?
It depends. It very often, yes. Like I will think about how I want to convey this feeling, or if something happens. So say, for example, when Roe versus Wade got overturned, I was like, so a lot, I will be very flooded, I'll be really flooded with all of these ideas and all of this rage. And then I have to then be like, well, how am I going to express this without just hitting the viewer over the head with saying, what the fuck is happening here? And so I have to think of ways to convey it that I feel like will get my feeling out and will get my point across and be effective. And
Because just with the painting of the little girl, just the title completely changes the way you view it, what you think about it, what you're thinking about outside the canvas, because every painting has things going on outside the canvas too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a good point to how impactful or not impactful just a title can be.
That's if people read the title. I have to say, a lot of people miss that. A lot of people are like, oh, that's so great, it's so great, you know. And a lot of people had no idea. Like, people that know me will look deeper and be like, okay, is she really going to paint this little girl as a ballerina? Or is there something else happening?
Right.
I do have this ballerina painting, which is, you know, really these hidden penises in the background. And, but also based on this lovely little girl that's just dancing, and I just am so. But I hear what you're saying, and but the reason I write on the canvas is because some people don't actually look at the title. So I feel like it's important to. I could have also put before on it. I did think about doing that, you know, instead of on the side, but I decided to go give the audience a break.
Well,
on that.
and that, and sometimes just from the artist's point of view, it's a fun experiment to see what people are gonna like. I mean, there are times I'll title things or keep things very vague, just because I know what I think. I spent however many hours thinking it while I was creating it.
Right.
And sometimes it's fun to see, is somebody else gonna miss something, or is somebody else gonna catch something?
Well, I think that's really interesting. When I went to school for art, when I was in grad school, no, actually it wasn't. When I was in college and I was taking art, my professor at the time was like, was very against any kind of political, like he was like, be subtle. Everything was about being subtle. You know, you have to be sophisticated and be subtle. Be subtle, be subtle. And honestly, I did try to be subtle for a while. I know now that being subtle is not my personality type. And also, I feel like half the population missed what I was trying to say. I mean, even with the words on the canvas, half the time people come up to me and I'm like, what did you think I was saying? You know, I'm like, okay, so I need to be really clear, because I don't want to, I mean, it's very important to me that people understand what I'm saying. And even if I have to risk being a slightly less sophisticated artist, I'd rather take that chance. You know, that is where I stand now. It's like, never mind that the only people that understand art are people that have an art background. I really want everybody to understand what I'm trying to do here.
Yeah, and that's the way it should be. It shouldn't be exclusive to just...
Well, it depends who you ask, because according to my professors, it should be exclusive. It was like a very elite club that we were supposed to belong to, and I just...
it's no fun, though.
I know. I don't even know if it's how worthwhile, you know, or value that is.
Well, you know, I just always see it, like, for lack of a better term, it's just a bunch of people stroking each other in a circle. And there's very little chance that, possibly, there's a little chance that original idea or something new or a different perspective could get in.
Right.
If you're just hanging out with other artists and you're not...
Especially other artists that are of a particular type.
Okay.
So, I mean, when I look at art history and the kind of art history I studied, I've often wondered what art history would look like if women were able to be involved early on. I mean, early art, women had to sign, you know, a male name if they wanted to get their art seen by anyone. So, really, I would say American white art history is, in the way that I learned it, is basically a male endeavor. And I dare say that minimalism would not have been the way that if women had been influential in art history, I somehow feel like they wouldn't be making art about stretcher bars or just blank canvas. And I do think minimalism is just, it would be interesting to see how it would have gone, as we have seen, like in Black culture, like, you know, in Black history or African art, any other kinds of art. Like, the evolution is very different.
Right.
Ours here was, you know, very white. I'm very white and very male, so I don't know where we would be in terms of what it would look like. So even more so when I have a professor who's saying we should be, it needs to be subtle on top of it. I'm like, okay, well, maybe for you, dude, but maybe not for, a woman who wants to scream on the top of her lungs.
Right. So the evolution of art in the other cultures, do you just so I understand better what you're saying, do you feel it evolved the way that it did because more women were involved in it?
It depends on which culture. It really depends on the culture. I think in certain cultures, yes. I think because art often in certain was not an offshoot of people that studied in the same places. Like I think European art, that people went to schools or they went to study with the masters under, and it was also funded by the church.
Right.
So we have a lot of virginal art, and it's very different than people that painted, about their own experiences or painted, pictures in the field or people that look like them. And I think, I don't know the answer and exactly what, where art history is, if it was ever, I think most countries are, have a patriarchy, so I would guess that art is patriarchally driven, no matter where you are, but very much here.
Mm-hmm. Who are some artists that you like or that you look to or inspired you?
Well, people that inspired me in the past, like Egon Schiele I think is a brilliant artist. Can't say he would be my top 10 on human beings, so he didn't inspire me necessarily politically, but I loved his work and I love his line, and I think he's brilliant. A painter now who I think is a brilliant painter is Jenny Saville.
Okay.
I remember going to see her work in the Brooklyn Museum and just crying. Like, oh my God, I will never ever be this good, and that's the truth. I won't ever be that good. Just brilliant, just lovely and brilliant. And then political artists that have come before me that I think have trailblazed, and I think that's really important.
Going to the first artist you mentioned, is it tough for you to separate the artist from their work? Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. I guess it depends.
Well, sometimes it is, and sometimes it depends on how egregious the person is. So if the person is truly egregious, then I don't give a shit what they make.
Right.
I don't care. No art is that important. And, so, I mean, Picasso was totally, he was terrible to women. So would I disqualify Picasso because of that? Probably not, because most men of the time were not great with women. I mean, women's rights, women did not have equal rights. But there are people that are really, that I would, anti-Semitic past, and people that I just, really, their work can't compensate or equalize the damage, in my mind.
Okay, gotcha. So, in closing, Caren, where can people find or see your work?
Well, since my Instagram is hardly up, I have a website, and it's Caren Jo Shapiro, Caren with a C. So it's Caren, C-A-R-E-N, JoShapiro.com. Until further notice, that's all I got.
Okay. And you've shown here in Strasbourg at the Creighton Bee Gallery and around the corner.
I've shown all over Strasbourg, and it's been interesting, actually, because when I first came up, it was like, no, you can't show that. No, you can't show that. And much to the credit of this town, and I do love this town, they show my work. I mean, they really, I've had a political art show on Main Street, which I was a little scared to do, but...
and they've turned out okay?
Turned out okay. I'm still here, so I'm okay. Right. That was what I was afraid of. But it was great. And we had a gun show. We were part of, it's just like lots of political, my art has not been censored. I haven't shown the extreme child abuse paintings, mostly because I do think that I would want to make sure that children would not be exposed. That's not because I think adults shouldn't be exposed,
Right.
but I'd want to make sure that there was some kind of screening because I would never want to harm a child. And I think that seeing things that are not age appropriate could be harmful.
Yeah.
But Strasbourg has gone with me on this journey and come a long way, and I'm really, it's pretty cool. From when I first came up, and I have this painting about this woman menstruating, and somebody's like, no, we can't show that. No, absolutely not. And I have this this drag queen painting, and they're like, no, we can't put that up. I have had somebody make me take down a painting or two.
Here?
Here in town, yep. Which, is a whole other story, but she thought it was a painting of Trump, but it actually was not. It was this man, like, dressed in drag, and it was based on something that happens. They have this Invasion of the Pines, which is a gay celebration on Long Island at Fire Island. So it was based on this picture of this guy, and for some reason she thought it was Trump, and she insisted I take it down. I was like, okay, well, that's weird, but anyway.
So did she think you were favoring Trump?
No, she didn't. It didn't matter. She just didn't want me to put up something political.
Oh, okay. Well,
there was a lot of forbiddenness about you cannot be political, and there's just a lot of stuff about that. So, we have the Create and Be gallery. Thank goodness for Sylvia and Courtney. I feel like things have shifted, and when I first showed up here, in fact, I was like, where are the artists of color? Like, this is we're having a white show. And the subject is white, and the picture, and the artists are white. And I think that probably won't happen again. I hate to take credit, but I will take a little credit for that, because I did bring that awareness and be like, every show, we can't have an all-white show. It is, like, not a thing. So I feel like that's gotten a lot better.
And I also think, I would go far to say almost single-handedly through Courtney and Sylvia, that I've seen much younger artists who are still in their teens.
Right.
And maybe, like, I met two. One was a young girl who had just been painting or drawing in her room and really never had the inspiration to show anything. Her work was good. And, it was hard for me to kind of get over that hump older than in my teens.
Right.
To have the balls, so to speak, to walk in and go.
Can I?
Yes.
The pussy.
Okay.
I object to the balls. Or the guts, go ahead.
But just for them to give people,
I know, it's beautiful,
the opening, to just feel comfortable and say, okay, we're not going to tear you down.
Right. Very brave, wonderful women, and I think what they've done in the town takes a lot of guts.
Yeah.
Really a lot.
And it's been successful, which is great.
Right.
Like, the town didn't know what it needed, and now it has it.
Needs a lot more of it, but yes. Right. As does the country, but yeah.
Well, Caren, thanks so much for coming on the show. It was a lot of, we've met in passing quick, and it was great to get to know you a little bit tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. Really nice.
Well, folks, another episode in the books. I want to thank Caren Jo Shapiro for coming on the show, and I want to thank you all for listening to this episode. Like I said in the beginning, a lot of cool stuff coming up, so stay tuned to the podcast. You can find it on all major podcast platforms and YouTube with a little bit of video. Until the next episode. Oh, wait a minute. Go on Instagram @AlbertShivers and check out the website www.albertshivers.com. Now, until the next episode, take care of yourself and take care of somebody else.